Tene ta Trungpa tela Jerdo tanda Nangpa Sanjipa Mahimpa Chaitan. Tene Nangpa Sanjipa Trungpa ki Ewa te Nangpa Nyepe Nane Nangpa Sanjipa Mahimpa Koro te la yang ta che zo tabu te la kamdara namba nga tsam gya yuwa re te ina yang ta te la du te hi na tabar nawa tang chebar nawa nyi sunwa re la teni te na ne tanda hyo ngadro la terenga ngadro la kari hyuba re se na chebar nawa muti jompen pa kor te hyuba re la ta muti jompen pe jewa nga tsime pa Ndepa ta tende je yore se ta te xepare la tene cerdo tanda Trungpa kor te xe gupi junsen te kande jire se na tene chitang ta ndepa mandrawa tende yore la tene ndepa mandrawa tenzo la ya tene je senchi lopa kona mayin pa kaxe la yenten chepara jen yore la te yenten la yenten yepara xipa chay tang yenten la yenten yepara xi na ya tene ngarang tsoge tomo mayin pe chu te la tene tomo mayin pe che shu chay yepa te ya ta ya te tang dhaga manduwa ngarang tso la chay misal ke che shu chay duga sompa chay hako ke chirto la tene chirul pa tang nangpa sangye pa mayin pa tang nangpa sangye pe chulu te kor te korte suware la tene teya tanda chitang tanda tunta ta kongri shopping on the se na ta takpar nawa la muti trangchen pa sengken che da tene shedra pa sengken che tene cherba pa sengken che da chepa wa sengken che da namba ya suware la trangchen pa te ta nguma chu tar nga shu ndawo tene Tronsong temba sercha senkin tige tene ko ro kongching ke nong to gom jap ne tene che palsher te si topan rawo che topan rawo che ne ta ngarang ke topa chi pa tar do tene tanda tene ndata bu chi insare samne tunta che zam ya pa te la moti trongching pa se ge yo re tene tejen do muti serapa sege yore la muti serapa ge tene la onju chimpo khelen ge yore la tene tige ya ti temba te tempe kawachi ne tene kong gam de pe kausla la onju chimpo ge ten do upa che bab yone tene korang ke tenchu tige tsik tende inam sambanda wo yopa te rebe se te upa te la onsu chimpe troba in samne tene tel kandre re chu te upa te ngo kou cha se tene te tuk te tsik tuk te tsa du tene upa te pursong re o ta takarang in sa re samne ta tela kap kalas muti sedra payo sege yor kap kala muti onchu payo sege yor kap kala muti uchu payo sege yor uchu pa sege ki junsin de kande de sena upa la kande ki vala de ne uchu pa sege yor
Now, in terms of the philosophical schools, there are the Buddhist schools and the non-Buddhist schools. And so of these two, we're talking about the non-Buddhist schools at the moment. And so here in this text, there are primarily 5 different non-Buddhist schools that are presented. They are presented like this, but actually you can sort of condense them all into 2 different types of schools. You have the eternalist schools and you have the nihilist schools. And so this morning, what was it that we talked about? This morning we talked about those nihilists. We talked about the Charvakas. The Charvaka school is a school that says that there is no reincarnation, there are no previous lives, no future lives, and so forth. And so we explained this position a little bit this morning. But when we talk about philosophical schools like this, we need to actually wonder, well, what is the reason for explaining this? What's the reason for knowing this? Because they all have many different positions. They make different assertions, and when we look at all those assertions, we have to realize that it's not that they're all completely wrong. It's not that at all. Actually, we have to recognize that in their assertions there are some qualities, and so we have to recognize those qualities for being where they are. So in terms of recognizing and knowing that there are qualities where there are qualities, that is why we have to understand them. And then when we come to understand our own particular Buddhist philosophy, our particular Buddhist view, then we can say, this is a feature of this. And it's not like that. This is different from how we Buddhists present it. And so that's what that's why it is. We can understand this and know that. And so that is why we learn what it is that the non-Buddhist schools present and the outsider non-Buddhist schools present. And so we talked about the Charvakas this morning, and so now we'll move on to the other four non-Buddhist schools, which are the Samkhya or enumerators, the Vaibhashika or the particularists, the Dagamba naked ascetics, and the Mimamsaka, the analyzers. And so of these four, the first of these is the Samkhya school. And the history of the Samkhya school is that when it first spread, it was founded by a person from Kapila, the city of Kapila. And so he went into the mountains to meditate. And when he was meditating there, he had some sort of realization. And through that sort of realization that he had, he said, this is probably what things are like. This is how it probably is. And so he said, and from that realization, he then founded the Samkhya or the Kapila Samkhya school. And so that was founded by a teacher from Kapila. That is the Samkhya school. The second school is the Vaibhashika, or the particularist school. And so this is a school that posits that there is a God, that there is a Lord named Ishvara in Sanskrit, or you could just say God or the Lord. So they assert that there is a God, and they have a lot of faith. And so they're in this God. Now, the founder of this school one day went to go meditating, and he was meditating at a shrine of this god Ishvara. And when he was meditating there was an owl that came and landed on the shrine. And he thought to himself, this must be an emanation of the god Ishvara, because every time he would think of a question and ask a question, the owl would bob its head. And so the owl bobbed his head, and he asked 6 different questions, and the owl bobbed his head 6 times, and then after that flew away. So these must be these 6 assertions, these 6 proper questions. In that way, these are the 6 basic assertions of the particularist Vaibhashika school. And so sometimes they're called the particularists or the Vaibhashikas. Sometimes they're called the school of Ishvara. And sometimes they're just called how shall I translate this? The owl school, we could say, because their teacher or their founder had such a good rapport with that owl.
Tene tatanda tate muti tanda setroparela tigi hiza tsik tan tupsi ta kona tsu kelengi yore la muti Trungpa patela tene tang nishitsanga ndabutela tangchi ne tene tige zo ndabutela tene yulje nambate zo sinki je yore tene zo te tene tanda takpa imba ta bembo imba ndabu chechu yore la tene tela zo njitinde tamchi sege yore te sedu tela tene dog tene tela longche ne tene tena korwalan cham tene te tabun korwalan cham ne tene jema tene dog tige nesurti hi ne tarwa togi yore se ta tene sungi yore la tene te ya tanda Mipham Oma Jing, Jerbe Nang La, Tene Muti Benani, Tawa Yaku, Dabote, Muti Trangjin Bare, Tenko Gomni, Zamba Imbecerna, Zote, Tache, Narazo, no Atamji Sanji, no Atawi Imbecerna, Kunjin number Hibate, Takoranga, Shu, some Kunjin number Hibik, Nesur, the Zo, some Hene, the Zo Insare, Samba. Tene zo de kinyin number hiba de jitang hiba re de yin na yo me nam na pembo insa re somba da bo re song ne ta de tan da tawa de la goji ya bo yo re song ne ngo jen da bo na yo re la tene de je so muti je pa pa sing kin de kan de se na muti se ro je re la muti se ro pa ge ta jitang ga la on ju chen bo ta la chang ba la so ba la so wa ta gi tin je khon da la on ju chen bo ta 창발라 소비 제바레 세게 와래라 드니데 모티 제바발라 디게 미살게 체슈라 드니 단당 하란스 열도 몬투 단니 히나 드니 겐송란 로그 마레 생긴다고 다 잘보게 몬투 자 드니 몬투 자디 텔라 메카히 몬투 라토아메 다 딘딜 네긴도 somni somja바텔라 모티 제바바 세게 와래 tene cherpa paate kaju chungware se na sanje tanga palcher tunyamdo chungware sege yaware ala muti jalwa senki tiga tene chay tiga depa te chitang tene le junde te pe kalchembo re se ne chepa la hipcha yapo yepa chayga ta tunta chay somna ware la ta tiga muti te tabu chungware Muti tapar nawa ya.
Tapar nawa shi. Dila kaso Japan dila kaso di mixe di nga shida sabu na so shida ge
shida pa imbala. Tini misal to tanda yurdo montu sena. Tini ngen son rog mare.
Yurdo And so the So the Vaibhashika school, the particularist school, says that there are 6 different types of knowable things, 6 different bases of the knowable things. And so that is their main proposition. So before that, we also talked about the Samkhya, the enumerator school. And so for the Samkhya school, they say that, that all of the different things that we know can be categorized in 25 different categories. And so everything can be enumerated or categorized in that. And of these, there is one that they call the principle, or in Sanskrit, it's called the prakriti. Prime or prakriti is like, it takes the form of the objects. And so they say that this is permanent and that it is material. And so they say that it also is what creates the world, that all the world comes out of this prime, this prakriti. Then they say that there is a self or a soul. And it's this self that sort of enjoys that everything that's created. It enjoys what the prakriti creates. And because of that, it ends up wandering through samsara. But later, when it comes to realize the nature of things, when it realizes the nature of what this prime, what the prakriti is, then it can be liberated from samsara. Now, Mipham Rinpoche, in his commentary on the ornament of the middle way, said of this view that actually this view is the best of all the non-Buddhist views. And the reason that it is the best of the non-Buddhist views is that it's something that came out of meditation. The teacher of this view developed it out of his meditation. And when he was talking about the prakriti, or the primary substance, the primal substance, it was like he caught a glimpse of the all-ground consciousness. And when he caught a glimpse of this, he thought, that must be this primary substance. That must be this prakriti. And he thought that it was material because when you actually, the all-ground consciousness is actually a very unclear sort of consciousness. So he just mistook it for being something material. And so, in this way, Mipham Rinpoche actually praised this as being a good, the best of the non-Buddhist of non-Buddhist philosophies. The next of the philosophies is the Mimamsaka school. So the Mimamsaka school is actually a sub-school of the Vaibhashika. So the Mimamsaka, or analyzers, are a subset of the Vaisheshika, or particularist schools. So there's a subset of that. But what the difference is between the two, so like the Vaisheshika, they assert that there is the god Ishvara and the god Brahma. These two are the creators of the universe and so forth. But what is particular to their view is they say that if you die in battle, you will not fall to hell, you will get to go to heaven. The reason that they make this assertion is that there was a king who was having trouble recruiting and conscripting people for his army. And so you say, oh, you can go to heaven if you go to battle, then that's a good thing for the king, sort of. So that is the Mimamsaka school. And so that is the third of the fourth. And the fourth is what's called here the naked ascetics, or the Digamba school. This is also known as the Jain philosophy. This is a philosophy that developed at the same time as the Buddha, and they also called their teacher the victor, or the Jinnah, which is why they're called the Jain school. And in their assertions, they hold that karma, cause, and effect are extremely important. So they are very, very careful about their conduct, and so they have very good, pure conduct. And so they developed their school out of this.
Tene ta tenzu ge tawa kanga ge kare sege yore se na zo te jitin je komde ta sepa poje yore ti zu pare sunkin da poje ta tene ta tanda da yore da de ta ngupo tu yore se nangpa sangji ba ge sona da yo mare sungi yore ta tanda tene namba sangje ba main betron ta tenju ge da yore se ta tende sege yore se ta ti ta we che bala tene ta tunta tenjo jungare la tunta tenjo jungju te la tanda tunta ta ta par nawa ye samsung ate tang huma jagar je yulla tunta tenjo tar tene tenju ge chu hi tene tela tene namba sangji be tawa ta chepar kare ye korte salvor hi pichetola tene ta nalinda chula khonla sangji ke tempa taru kap dong betamala hili chula khonla sangji ke tempa taru kap sola tene pendeta chimbo tenju ge tene ta ti ge depa tende yore namba sangji be ge tene tawa ta tungta tende yore samne ta ti salvor chepa yin bechna kamdar ta ti moti pe tawa cham ta pesinol yore la tene tela tene Thrangu Rinpoche ge tanda tuntarin chin tingwa sengkinje ta sungwa re la de sung kapso tene tela kongge kasap ma wanda bote tene namba sanje ba mayin ba yeshu ge chulu to muslim ge chulu tenzo ya tene chitang ge tawe ge chebar ge onda sena jitin chepa poche yepa khelen ge yore ta tinde ge tunta ge chebar yore la tene te yendo ta tenda tenzo ge te number ge tene kan khelen ge yore sena tene so sinking doje ja tene yepa khelen ge yore doye dna wada tene jitin chepa po yepa khelen ge re sone ta khong ge tende ngunzina te jitin chepa po yepa khelen ba ta tene tanda do yepa khelen ba re de yinaya tela tomo ma imbe chishu shira yapu yore tene shambata nije yenping ge tanto be kawa chimbuchi tene kalija tende nangking ge tene jivu cheparjin mambu chen yore sone korang sen yindabu riri niri yone ta tende ge jivu cheparjin mambu chen yore tene tenzo namba sangji bi chulu mayinpa re se ne ngarang soge tepa tang lo tepa mepa tang tene lotar nabo te se rungu maare tene tela tepa tang kukur tang tsikur gug re te yinaya susu ge tawe chepar te kaku gug re ta tende re samne tenzi to.
So what is it that all these schools, what are all of their views? Well, their view is that there is a creator who made the world, who created and made the world. And they also say that there is a self, that there is a soul, or that there is a self. And that this is a thing. It's something that truly exists. So in the Buddhist view, we say there's no self. In the non-Buddhist view, they say that there is a self, there is a soul, and that this exists. And so because of these distinctions and the distinctions within their own views, there became the different philosophical schools. Now, all four of these philosophical schools are what we call eternalists. They say that things are permanent. And so these spread in ancient India. And when they spread in ancient India, and then we also had the Buddhist teachings that spread, and there were some differences in the views. It's important to clearly explain the differences between the views. At the time that Buddhism spread in India, there were the great monastic universities at Nalanda and at Vikramashila. And when the teachings spread there were many great scholars and pundits who said okay, these are the assertions of the non-Buddhist schools, these are the assertions of the Buddhists, and you have to distinguish between, and so they distinguished carefully between and clearly between these two. And so these are basically the views, in a nutshell, of the non-Buddhist views. Now, when the Dalai Lama was teaching on a text called the Golden Garland of the Philosophical Schools, or in Tibetan, the Drupta Rinchen Trangwa, the Golden Garland of the Philosophical Schools, in this, he sort of added on to this, filled it in, because those were the Indian schools. But nowadays, there are also, of course, the Christian and the Muslim and many other great religions. And these are religions that assert that there is a God who created the world, and they assert that there is a soul and so forth. They say there is a soul or a self that truly exists. They say there is a God who created the world. And so they present their own philosophies, their own views, and they present these. And so they do say that there is a creator, they do say that there is a soul, but each of these also has their own particular special features. And there are also wonderful ways, if you practice them, to develop loving kindness, to develop compassion, to develop true altruism and the wish to help others. And so these, and there are many people who hold these views, who really go through a lot of effort and a lot of difficulty to help other beings. And so really, and there have been many great beings who have appeared out of all of these schools. And so it's important for us to really recognize this and to say that, to recognize what is good and to give them credit for what they are. So just because they're not Buddhist does not mean in any respect that we should not have any faith in them and that we should not respect them. It does not mean that at all. Rather, we should have faith in them and we should respect them for what they are. But at the same time, we need to understand what the distinctions between the Buddhist view and the non-Buddhist views are.
Tene tate jitinje konde sepapo yepa kelenge yore jitinje konde sepapo je yepa kelemba te namba sanji be junta ta tinge yore be sinan tinge yo mare te yinaya nan jitin sepapo kelemba te ya je mela pento yenkin tene chudan tunba ndaboya 용근도 라 당하랑게 제 텐데기 주지바 케바 yentin cheparchi tendela tene godrundabu hyuga kokapndaboda tende chongyo mare te yinaya tene ngarang ngohi bache waranasla muslim ge kujin sombaje yorilla tene tel taga sikecheki tene ngarang zain lagu mare tene zain la ne mengo kor togre mela chak zain la togre te yinaya Allah ge ngo kortu mare korang higirela tin ngarang jazin labna rungu mare nyeng mare sen te ten hi boy ke ten da bu je pa sang bu ji gu tin demba ta tangbo gu gre chamba ta ni je gu gre som de ke kulong ji yung ge yore la kulong de kan yung ge yore sen tin ji tin se pa bo je yore ta de ge thu la thel ro ji re ti ge thu dan thum ba ji gu gre som de ke kulong ya bo tin de ya yung ge do la teacher na chitang namba sangji pe tawa to thingi yo revision thingi yo mare ti na iti duja revision duja rimundu somebody.
And so these religions say that there is a creator, a God who created the world. And so is this something that fits with our Buddhist view? Well, it isn't. It doesn't fit with our Buddhist view, but still, if you assert that there is a creator, actually this can be pretty good. This can be a view that can really help you to bring you to help other people. It can be very good and actually lead you to do things that do fit with Dharma. So I actually have not really had many opportunities to have any really in-depth dialogue with someone who's really educated and knows these religions and these philosophies well. But in Varanasi, where I have a monastery, there is a silk merchant who is Muslim. And he sometimes comes over, and when he comes over, we have discussions and we talk about things. And he says things like, you can't tell lies. You can't tell lies, because if you tell a lie, you might fool that other person that you're talking to, but you aren't going to fool Allah. And since you won't fool Allah, He's going to know what you're going to do. So it's important for you to be mindful, to always be straightforward and honest, to always behave well. And to have love and compassion, to have that good motivation. It's important because Allah knows what is going on in whatever you're doing. So whatever you do, you need to do things that really fit with the will of Allah, that fit with Allah's mind. And so you have to do that. So it comes out that he ends up having a very good motivation. So he has a very good motivation. Is his view, does it fit with the Buddhist view? It doesn't fit. But is it bad? It certainly isn't bad.
Tene ta tetardo chungarela tene ta tenda tutarin chintin gen delvagan na ya dehi na kapsala ya tene kalap na tene chitang chulu tenzo kanga yapu hengure hene tene tela lotanda botinde sinin kamare inchi minchi kukursi gube junsen te tenzo la tumo main be chechu tene mege sambala pemba mege kunhon la pemba me demba ta tangbo ta yapo ta chamba ta nijem pere ge joi zawanda bo yoba tende yore la tene teacher na yapu gugre te yinaya te inchi minchi tene chulu kanga nyamne chi gube chaba yo mare te sosu ge lam te nyamne che na yapu yore samne labja tende nangdo la ti labja te yapu yimbada samsung la tende ge kunhonda bo te la tene ta te jeso nangba sanji betundare la nangba sanji betunda te kapndar sauna ta chitang namba ni song yore jo lamdu seba senkete ta tanda jo lamdu seba tseni tipa sedu ndoi tawa jaitan ndrebu lamdu seba songo doji tipa te jo lamdu seba sedu ta ngaran so gewa nyamsole tipa me gewa pang tingen zeng hine tong lang tong la so ba gam ta te cham nyamlin zor temba tela ndoi tawa sege yor jo tseni tipa sege yor ta din rebu lamdu seba sedu tela ta ngara maon palan rebu yapo topa ka so la tene lai koi namba la ngambar zo par sanje longje zo par ko sonji chu ko sanje chu ko tu ko namba la ngambar zo par sanje ba yin be cherna rebu yiram jalai ko gamba ta wa dawa la so par go ne thap namba na zo par go ne rebu lamdu seba te so ho doji ti pa namba so ho doji ti pa te ta chitang namba ni song yo re la tene te na ne tangbo jun se ni ti pa te la number ye song re
In his teaching on the Golden Garland of the philosophical schools, the Dalai Lama gave some really good advice. And he said that we need to know all these religions. We need to know what they are. And when we know them, we should not have any misconceptions or think they're bad and be disrespectful of them. We need to respect them. All of the different religions have their own particular views, and all of these views can be the route that lead people to treat each other well, to have love and kindness. All of these religions can be straightforward, honest, good, and helpful. They're the route for developing love and compassion. And so we have to understand them, we need to know them, we have to realize that they're all good. But that does not necessarily mean that we have to practice all of the different views. We actually need to practice our own path and practice that well. And so, listening to that, I thought this is really good advice. And so I wanted to pass that on to all of you. So we need to have that sort of a motivation. So that was the description of the non-Buddhist schools. And following that comes the description of the Buddhist schools. And so among the Buddhist schools, there are generally two different primary divisions, the two main different vehicles. The Sutra vehicle, which takes the cause as the path, and the Secret Mantra Vajrayana, which takes fruition as the path. And so the Sutra vehicle, which takes the cause as the path. When we say that taking the cause as the path, this means that the cause of practicing virtue, of giving up misdeeds and non-virtue, doing meditation and gathering the accumulations. And so it's practicing just these. So that is primarily the view of the sutras. So this is the view of the sutra schools, which take the cause as the path. And then the second type is the Secret Mantra Vajrayana, which takes the result as the path. And so in terms of taking the result as the path, it's like thinking to ourselves, we want to attain the good result. And the embodiment of that result is the Yidam deity. The Yidam deity who appears in the form of the Sambhogakaya, or enjoyment body of the Buddha, or appears in the form of the Dharmakaya of the Buddha, or in the form of the Nirmanakaya, or emanation body of the Buddha. And so this is the resultant body of the Yidam deity. So we meditate upon our own body as being this body that is the result of the meditation. We recite mantras, and we use many different other methods. So these are the practices of the Secret Mantra Vajrayana, the second of the two general categories of Buddhist schools. And so of these two different categories, the first of these is the Sutra school, which takes cause as the path. And among this Sutra school that takes cause as the path, there are four basic schools.
Tene number yeti ta kandi sangware sena ni tu chero dnawatan do de pa ni tipa chimbola senjang pa dong uma pa ni de number ye sangware la tene ta de na ni tangbo de chero dnawatan do de pa re ta de ta bu junta number yibo de jonggu bu yunsin de 간데리 세나 다 산지 좀 된데 지틴제 칸라 셈베 갑소 아테네 담베 추데 서바 타바지 중화래라 테네 당보네 삽진 자치와지 상나 메서바테 조게 테네 고그마레 테네 테타그마레 테네 다텔 고주문두 테히주문두 섬네 테네 지수 주그마레라 존신 티처나 산지지 지당그 도 넘버 2 송요래라 도 넘버 2 보데 장단다 테네 제 녜란데 넘버 2 송요래라 장단 순두텔라 당보 칼리야 장네 테네 야 림비 장네 당볼 응네 마힘바 테네 제성네 야 장외게 쳐도 성가바텔라 종단근도데 희숨바다 테네 니바딩 녜란근도데 순딩 응네 장네게 다티 검야 조어 냠네 제주고 조어데 가리임바데 살보르 템바텔라 녜란근도데 숭하rel라 테네 닌투세로도 나와도 도데바도 센성바텐조 다 장단게 도디게 공바데 제타와yen도 템바레 때 다 산지 좀 된데 젬베 값을라야 다티 가르치와 요아rel라 산지 좀 된데 젬니 림부 소나야 당아란주 당보 주고라 주부 값소 간데 용그레세나 당보니 리바가 톱 첨보 짤 첨보 누바 첨보라고 저거레세나 저거 말에 당보 렘지냐 렘지테 하고 드네 림베가 하고니 살고바인 베체나 당보 닌투 시로다 나와도 도데베 따와라고 텐데 때나 드네 이치지 라와다 대바동 무지 라와요 제다 tene te jeso rimbe ke tene omabada sensangpada omabada pipa chimbu ke lamde tena te tobar lawa yimbe cherna ta tela tene ta kapndar tene ta tanda tunta ye cham sanji jamden deji chang rimba kendala tene tembarela te ya per pega yo per na pugu chunchun la tene megembe kala tene satugi yo marela tene pugu chunchun la rembe kala te pugu chunchun la te tene te ya che tene megembe kala satugi rimbe chagi yo arela pe te gendo tangbo le tangbo pala tongden ke do de nam chi gongden de te tene rimbe ngeren ke do de nam te na tene pe pento chimbo ta to lawa ta hi lawa ta ngi hi je lawa yumbi.
So what are these four different Buddhist schools? Well, the four different Buddhist schools are first in the foundation vehicle of what's sometimes the Shravakas, the listeners of the disciples, which are the Great Exposition or Vaibhashika school, and the Sutra school, or in Sanskrit, Sautantrika school. And then among the Mahayana schools, there are the mind-only, or Chittamatra, and the middle way, or Madhyamaka school. So these are the four different schools. And so of these four different schools, well, what is the reason that there happen to be four different schools? Well, the reason is that when the Buddha appeared on the earth and taught the Dharma was brand new. So the Dharma was brand spanking new, and if you tell the most profound and the most difficult and the vast and the greatest view of the Buddha, of the Dharma at that time, no one's going to understand it. And they're going to say, "What's this? That can't be. There's no way. I don't believe that." And then they'd never enter Buddhism and never follow. There wouldn't be any Buddhist followers in any way. And so for that reason, when the Buddha taught the Dharma, he taught two different types of sutras. He taught the sutras of what is called the guiding meaning, which is sometimes also translated as the expedient meaning, the guiding meaning, and also the definitive meaning. So you have the guiding meaning and the definitive meaning. And of these two, the first that he taught is the guiding meaning. And so the guiding meaning is that first you have to guide people and guide them gradually down the path to the point where they'll be able to understand and realize the actual meanings. And so first you guide them with that, and you tell things that may not be exactly how things actually are, but by telling them that way, then gradually you come to the point where you can realize the way things actually are. So that is the guiding meaning. And then the second meaning is the definitive meaning. And so this is the main thing that we actually need to meditate upon, the main things that we actually need to practice. That is what is taught in the sutras of the definitive meaning. But if you just teach those right away, people aren't going to understand them. So first you teach the guiding meaning, and then that brings you to a place where you can understand the ultimate definitive meaning. And so that's how it was at the time of the Buddha. And so you might wonder, well, now it's been a long time ago. That was a long time ago. Can we just skip right to the ultimate meaning right now? Well, actually, it's still kind of useful to have that guiding meaning, because when people meet the Dharma for the first time, they gradually need to work into it. Some things, such powerful logic, such difficult, hard things to understand, that you first actually need to know a little bit. And so after you know a little bit, then gradually you can come to the point where you can get to the real meat of it. So first you have the views of the listener vehicles of the Great Exposition or Vaibhashika and the Sutra school or Sautantrika school. And because these are schools that it is easy to believe in, it is easy to have faith and devotion in them, and then gradually you can then begin to learn the views of the mind-only and the middle way schools, the views of the Mahayana path. They'll be, at that point, the Mahayana path will be much easier to understand. And so that is why the Buddha taught these 4 different philosophical schools. It's taught as sort of a progression. It's like, for instance, to give an analogy, if you have a baby, you can't give them adult food right away. First, you have to give the baby food. And then once they're used to eating and have some teeth, then you can give them adult food. And so in the same way with beginners, then first you start out with a guiding meaning. And then when you have a foundation in that guiding meaning, then gradually you can add the ultimate meaning. And then it's very beneficial. It becomes easier to realize what's happening, easy to know what's happening, easy to have real certainty in the teachings.
Tene ta tenrabo ngara lo chunchung ge kapsula nyamnyong awnyong la tene po chunchung ta lo chunchung dabo pecha tambo ta kapsula ta ti kapla do me pandabo ta chutang chi tomba ni senki ti hira ko nyung yo mare la tene tangbo ngarang ge jenju de ta kapsula jenju ge oni 장주 senje pen 보다 드니 제바 폴로게 촐다보다 디바야바게 촐다보다 저 제 할레반다보 가야 좀 마송라 드니 히라 레우노니 더요 말에서 아 아카리 더요 레바다 더 메바데 가와용 히게레 선바다보 동보 할레반다보 데 운용라 드니 이나야 다 쇼핑에 고와다르도 드니 더 메베 준세 딘데 tendu de la o te do sinkin te yo ta ge mundu wa sambata ko tanguni do mi to bihira yo are be sene yo mare te na yo ko ga te ni pasi do me do yo ge mundu wa sambata ko ta te un cheto banda ko ta te yung do la ti ji ni ta ti ji ni ngarang ngam je ke pesa ta re la ngam je ke pesa ta ka la te ne kande yo are se na te ne ta 두트린 참이 들어봤다. 되네 히바케지 참이 들어봤다. 근데 다 산이 제마 용거래라. 된저게 된다데 고온들 생나 바보다 오다 띵문이 인사래. 두트린 참이 리트바 인사래. 케지 참이 리트바 인사래 삼바다보다. 되네 갑갈라 동바니레세 추통지 동바니레세 동바니다 가바세 생그 때니고 som용라 카니고 아 동바니 되도 요 말에 나랑 나랑pe homba chaboche narang khenpo tela ya tombaningi khelen ko mare sitinde kyonyongla tene tombu le tambo pala tene kwa ke kale kapo da bo yoarela tene rimbe tene ometen chu tin ta a tombani ta sigle songsa da bo yo.
So actually, this is my own experience when I was little. So when I was little and I was first studying philosophy and texts, I really hadn't, up to that point, I hadn't heard anyone say anything about lack of a self, selflessness, emptiness, or anything like that. I didn't know anything about that. And so we were first studying, and the first text we studied was The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. And in studying this, in the beginning of it, there wasn't anything really surprising. It talks about the benefits of bodhicitta, how to make offerings, how to confess misdeeds, and so forth. There wasn't anything really amazing or outstanding in it. And then we got to the 9th chapter, the wisdom chapter, and we got there and it said, there's no self in it. Wait a minute. That can't be. There is a self. There's got to be a self. How can there be no self? It's like, how can that be? It's like, but then gradually sort of thinking about how it is and getting a little bit of an understanding, thinking about the logics and the reason, I thought, well, maybe there isn't a self. Okay, maybe there's no self. I can sort of get that. Now, this would not qualify as, the wisdom that realizes emptiness by any stretch, but it was sort of an understanding that, okay, probably there's no self. So I was able to develop that sort of understanding of that. Then the next text that we studied was the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu. And what is the main thing that this teaches? Well, the main thing that this teaches is that all phenomena are made up of partless units. They're made up of indivisible particles and of finite, the infinitesimally small, short moments of time. And everything's made up of these particles, or of these units. And this is something that really fit. I could really get this one, and I thought to myself, yeah, this is how it is. Everything is made up of particles. There are these real instants of time. This really makes a lot of sense, and so it's like everything really made a lot of sense there. But to say everything's emptiness, nah, that can't be. There's no way you could say everything's emptiness. I even was so bold as to one day say to my Khenpo, I don't accept that there is emptiness. and so, this is why it is for beginners. For the beginners, it's difficult to understand for beginners. And because it's difficult to understand, you have to go gradually. And so gradually then you can get to the middle way. And so we got to the middle way, and it was like, then when we actually studied the middle way, then I was able to say, oh yeah, everything is emptiness.
Tene ta teacher na sanji jom din de ji jom tambor chu su kapsula ta cherdo chu jin kollo rumba sum sinkin de sunarela tene te na ne rumba tangbo de ta tangbo sanji jom din de jagar doji den dong bar zo par sanje ne ta khori ga chitang ngireng do de to chongdang do de nam chebar hiro yore de ta tomo yons trakwa tar to she na tene ngambar zo par sanje ne khong sundu de la tene tambe chu senken de sapa hiwa tuba tang tarwa pe yabu yore tene dutsutab pe pento chembo yore de tene sulla tena ta te ko tugu mare hi tugu mare ta te le chu de mahi basene tene embene so gomra japne yukna yapore sone ten ko tene yapo dentro dainla tene chu masong wala yupare la tene te jeso tene la nam ji solwa tapala tene remji tambe chu chung ko lo korne tene ta te tambe chu chung ko lo ramba tangbo te demba ya tene dungal je demba ton kanjung ke demba ton gop demba ton lam je demba te demba namba ye chu chung ko lo te korne te dembe ne tang ra bo ta tende re sone ta ji tin je kham de ranging ke tene phumbo nga se phumbo nga ranging te la tene phumbo se du kan de jre se na ta ngaran so ge chitang ge tunthi lo majur we no wala kan de kha ge yore se na do ra bo dembar truba do ra bo tene chakpa tang hemba tang hedang tang ngajal la su yol du churba che ge yoli na yo do ra bo demba tene nang lupo yin na yo do ra bo demba te la cha yin ji yol du churba ji yore sambala yore de yinaya te ngune sena yo mare pumbore zoji pumbo se du zosu no tsiru ga reda rawata kangbala so ba yinaya nda nange tene luda sen yinaya nda tuma mambo pongyo pandago durtin tuma dupa ngupo tuma dupa tene tor chosho dabo duji jingu poche re zoji pumbo se du tene te mambo pongyo pa yin beche na tombo yan zam tene te jima man ton roju ya pandago re dungal je namba re samne zoji pumbo tang choru pumbo tang duji je pumbo nang sen yinaya tene chorwa tang duji tang duji tang nam hi ten zo mambo pongyo pa nang yin je ma to nimbo dabo dodo dabo yo mare samne 다 dungal je demba tang ta ti dungal te pawar se pala Countries upon to you are Visena, Tangala Dungal Gugumandu, Napa Dungal the Yugi in Somni, Panto Visena, Panto Mare, Tintin, Naransu Jitin Sendi, no wonder, Sharara, Terin, Sani, Nani, Yini, Yungi Warela, Tating if I Yogi, Tanga Gugumandu Sana, you Mare. Tenipena Chipoji in you Marilla, Duboji in a Kadu Kadu, you gonna you to your Marilla. Tatil Tashi Rabo Karichi Gugarisan, Jo, the Mebashi Gugiware, Jo the Mebashepala Kandi Gugarisena, Jo de Ta Ledan Niemo Barella. Tina is our Niemo Bala to be or Niemo Bandesha, Hedan, Timu, Najala Subal, Tiniti and Zambachan, Chimbotan, Hemba Chimbote, Latin, Yungi Warella. Tiniti Hemba Chimbote, Power Sepala, Kandi Gugi or Sena, Hemba Chimbote, Tangan Desha Gugumundu, Na Hedan Gugumundu, you yogi, Pang yogi, Sena, Pantugi or Mare. The Yinayang Pang with Tapji told you are within told you are. Kandi told you are saying, Tinin Desha don't hear down the Niemo Palaso, but Tenju Joti, Dot and Zambala Tin Yungi. Naran Da sinking Jay, Zaini, Tati Chipo Gugundo, Tela Tini Chipola, Zoya Mepatini Mambo Gugundo, Tangala Dupo Gugumandu, Dupo de Tani, Taya Mepatini, Dupo de Tangman Rabo say Gugundo, somebody, Tini Hemba Chimbo Jay, Abate, Dot Jinzing. Dot the pay, dollar jeans in Chimbochi. Yaba tela tini, Yungi Warella. Dot jeans in the Pomor Sepala, candidates in the dot the Cavato Tena, Winnie see the Pont to Nuba Yore, Nuba the Naransoli Yore, Caridesiana, Dot Koran Cavato Tadu, Dot Koran Your Marella, Naransoli Yapatella Yapanzana, Tinte Ponya Your Marete, Mepatella Yapanzindu, Mepin Nengo and Rabotete Hakosona. Tini dance in the ranking don't draw in the Cerna, Tini, that the Domi Gongu, Lam Tela, Domi Gongu, Lam de Domi Gon and Devo, the Tiniamo Baremji, Talni, Gopdemba, Togi or La, Tini teacher na, Demba Ye, Chuchukolo Corne, Tati, Pumbo, Tom, Tini, anything now.
And so for that reason, when the Buddha taught the Dharma, the Buddha taught the 3 different wheels of Dharma. He turned the wheel of Dharma 3 times. And so the first time that he turned the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha had just awakened to Buddhahood at the Vajra seed in Bodh Gaya. And when he awakened there at that time, of course, there were there are the teachings of the sutras of the definitive meaning and the guiding meaning and so forth, and special teachings. But here, in terms of the general, well-known framework of it, when the Buddha awakened to complete and perfect awakening, he thought to himself, wow, this Dharma that I've realized is really deep and peaceful, unelaborate, luminous, non-compound. Like nectar it is this Dharma I've found. Whomever I teach it shall not understand it, and so without speaking I'll stay in this wood, he said. And so this is really peaceful, really profound Dharma. And it's like a nectar. It's something that can be really helpful to all of it. But people just aren't going to understand it. Whoever I teach it to is not going to understand it. And so it's better for me not to teach. I'm just going to go off in the wood and stay in solitude and meditate like this. And so he spent 7 weeks in solitude, not teaching the Dharma. But then the gods came down, they supplicated him to turn the wheel of the Dharma, and he did then turn the wheel of the Dharma. And when he turned the wheel of the Dharma, what is it that he taught? Well, he taught the 4 noble truths, the truths of suffering, the truth of cessation, the truth of suffering, the truth of origin, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. He taught the wheel of the 4 noble truths. And when he turned this Dharma wheel, or taught the Dharma, then what he taught is that everything that we see in this world, everything that we see is by its very nature. It's the 5 aggregates. We have these 5 aggregates. And so when we talk about an aggregate, we say that everything is by nature an aggregate, then there are all these things that appear to us. And the way that we normally perceive things, the way it appears to us, it's like, actually there is something real there. There's something solid, real, that we can fix onto it. There's something that we can experience desire or aversion or delusion towards. There is a real object, and that object is solid. There's something actually there. Looks like there are things outside, and then there's our body. Our body is real. There's something real about our body, and solid, a sort of singular thing about our body. And we feel like there is something for us to be attached to there. But actually, if we look at the nature of our body, we see it's just an aggregate. It's a conglomeration of everything brought together. So we say with our body, like it's the aggregate of form. So it's the aggregate of form. If we gradually look at, we see that all of the external things, they're just various things that are all put together, all the external mountains, fences, houses, rivers, and so forth. And then our own internal bodies, they're just many different things put together, many atoms that are all collected together. They're all collected together, but they're all ready to just fall apart at any time as well. So that is the aggregate of form. And so it's just many different things that are aggregated together. So this first is realizing that so everything first comes together, and then later it's all going to fall apart. And so it's similar with our mind. Our mind is, we think that our mind is this solid thing, but actually there are different types of things. There's feelings, formations, conceptions, and consciousness. So we have the four different aggregates in the mind of feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. And so it's just many different things that are put together. There's no single thing. There's no real essence, no solid thing that is our mind. And so that is the truth of suffering. The five aggregates are this truth of suffering. And so we want to get rid of the suffering. And if we think to ourselves, I don't need that anymore, I'm not going to do that, I'm just not going to go there. World, you go away. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. Is that going to work? It's not going to work. The world is happening today. It's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen the day after that as well. If we just say, I give up, it's not going to happen anymore, I don't want it, that isn't going to stop it. We aren't going to be able to stop our suffering. But if we look at it, we see actually there is a root that all of this suffering comes from. And because there's a root, we have a root that it comes from. There's something we can do. There's a method we can do. We have to realize what the cause of it, and the cause of the suffering, the origin of this is karma and afflictions. And of these two, the primary one that it is the afflictions. It is the afflictions of greed, aversion, delusion, pride, and all of the other fictions. It's all the fixations, all the clinging and attachments, the great clinging and attachment that we have. And we need to, if we can get rid of those, we can get rid of our suffering. But when we want to get rid of these, if we just say, okay, I don't ever need to be greedy anymore, I don't ever need to get angry or feel hatred or aversion, I can just get rid of them. Is this going to get rid of them? It's not going to get rid of them. So we need to look for a way to get rid of them. And is there actually something that we can look for? Is there a method we can look for? There is a method that we can look for. And the reason is because our greed, our aversion, and our delusion, our pride, all of our afflictions have a cause. And that cause is clinging to a self, fixation on a self. We cling to the idea that I am me, there's a self there. We cling to that. We think that we want to be happy. We want to have all of the happiness. We want to always have happiness, and we want it to have every single happiness for ourselves. Our wish for happiness can never be satisfied. There's no end to it. And we want to get rid of every single shred of suffering. We want to get rid of all of our suffering. We want to cleanse it all, just get rid of it, scrub it all away. And so we have this great clinging to this idea of getting rid of all the suffering. And what this is called cherishing ourselves. So we have this self-cherishing. And so, if we have this self-cherishing, then we want to be able to get rid of that. And we can get rid of that, because if we can get rid of the cause of that, then we will be able to do that. Realize, oh, there isn't really a self there. Then we can get rid of the cause. Because when we are fixated on a self, when we grasp at a self, if there were something that we could actually grasp onto, then there'd be no way that we would be able to get rid of that grasping. But because there's nothing actually to grasp onto, then if we realize that there's nothing to grasp onto, then that grasping naturally then goes away. And so we then can meditate upon the selflessness of the individual, and that is the path. The truth of the path is meditating upon selflessness, and through meditating upon this selflessness, then we will gradually come to the results of giving up the afflictions one by one, and we will come to the truth of cessation. And so in this way we have these four noble truths. And so in teaching this and turning the wheel of Dharma, of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha primarily taught that everything is made up of aggregates.
Tembaga Loma to Nintu Sun Chimbotan, Tene Temp Terap Dance, Tati, Kankaola Supani, Rumba in the Mrabni, Mrabje de Tombichu, de Sanji Jumping de Katombo, Tembaji, Chujunko Korwatela, Tambo, two some Gagone, Tenilla, Tatan gave Hiniti, Lomatil thing. Gave Hiniti, Lomatil Tay, Lomatin Juge, Tambo, Taquagatani, Yapo, Hibase, to some Gatena Pop. Tene, Quagatani, Yapo, Hini, Tegombe, Nyonsalon, Tegombe, Nyonsalone, Tene, Rimbeg, Tartuk and Devo Top. Top at the young capsula, Takandich in Rimbagan to the Tarwari Siena, Tene Tatanda, so Tene, Nintu Sherotan Nawatum, Dodiba, Tawani de Chone, Tene Tati, Tarwarella, Tati, so Kakan, Tangi or Sena Katum, but Dembagi, Chujunko Korwatella, Tangi or. Tene Tati, Nyomsalam Becasolo, so Kari, Nyomsalangarisena, Dembagi. Demba yete nyomselengi yore. Demba yete nyomselen du tel tachitang tawa gomba cheba lasoba mambu yore de ina yo tawe ge zo te kongsa ge dame ba de ran zo sini. Tene nyemo ba te ndolu ge tabla, nyemo ba te hiwe ge tabla. Tene zane nyemo ba chodong monsong te. Tachitela chitang on de sina ngaran sol driba nisi. Nyemo ba driba te hiji driba te namba ni yore la ti noni nyemo ba driba te pongwa te zor se du te la ti lam te nyamselen ba te la nyen tu shi rod na wa ton to de ba ni si ta ti tawa namba ni re la te kam dar song na ni timi sendo ni la temin jen de ba den den ye jong ta ti de ba mandawa te si yore te tomo do ta chik pa re zo tene ta tandang gondo shuba yendo 두세 공도세나 젠림보 예바테다 테네 ngupu 공도세나 ngupu rakwa 텐조 테네 강가 kunzu 테네 뎀바 마임바 코랑 주만다보다 단당아란서 출반다보레라 당문이 그 짜와때 가나 투기 요아레세나 둘트이 망보 둘트이 참이세나 다 둘트이 때야 돈부터 텐데세나 샤르로 넙송게 차이에 바텐조 요아레 대파 요마릴라 대차자니 예주메 돌타라 히보테 돌타랍 세게 요아렐라 디 돌타랍 대다 뒤지온데 세나 다단다 당볼로 테니 다와 테니 혀 테니 뒤세 karma laso barimba yendola 디 락바텐 저 뎀바트바 요마릴라 테니 타와 테니 케지마 퉁퉁 네 마옹 그 차자니 체주메 yin tung tela keji chami sege yoarela tini teacher na ta chitang ngaran chol kari yoare sena chi yuldu no zuch number cheta non senje number la no hibat number ni yoare tini che yulju number zuch number la hawa tinju kandi sini chong yoare sena dulti chami tinde mambo nzamni ya so ni chong yo re sinkin te do nang hipa te uni demba yo mare la tene rakwa tenzu ta te lo dawa tene khasan terin rabo yo mare la ta ona kari yo re sina kechi chami tun te kona ta te yo re la tene te mambo chomne ta chungwa che re sene ta te mambo chomba yimbe cherna gongsa ka da sinkin te ngarang su kantin sinkin yo re sen da te njurwa me pe ka takwa rabo khasan terin sanyi nani nga puku chung ka kaw ka da ta tanda nga gyembe kaw ka da ta tene gengo cha pe kaw ka da te kanga chikwa yin te njurwa me pa yin sampan rabo yo re la te ta kechi chami ta dutrin chami tenzu tsani tandigi yo ma re la tene dutrin chami to kechi chami te hi na tene gongsa ka da me pa te ranghin ki hi ki yo re la tene te tena papa pavgi yo re ta ti ge cherna tene nyentu sherota na wa tong de ba ni de ti khatu tene gomba tikpa yo re song de ma.
And so the Buddha first taught this, and then when he taught this, his students listened to it, and then gradually this started a lineage, the teachings, a succession of the teachings. He taught it, and there were the 7 elders of the teachings. First the Buddha taught it, and then his great students first, the great Kashyapa, and then after Kashyapa passed away, there was Ananda, and then gradually there were 7 other great elders who preserved the teachings for many generations, and they primarily taught these teachings of the 4 Noble Truths. And so when they taught these teachings of the 4 Noble Truths, first the teacher would teach, and then through through listening and contemplating them, developing an understanding. So a spiritual friend or a teacher would teach these to students, they'd instruct the students in them, and then first the students would develop an understanding, they'd study, they'd contemplate, and then they would be able to practice them through meditation. And as they practiced them through meditation, they would gradually come to the ultimate results of their meditation. And so this is how the teachings are passed down, how they're preserved and taught. And so primarily when we talk about these teachings, they're primarily passed down in terms of 2 different teachings. The Great Exposition School, which in Sanskrit is called the Vaibhashika School. So the Great Exposition or Vaibhashika School. And then the other school is called the Sutra School, which in Sanskrit is called the Sautantrika School. So the Sutra or Sautantrika School. So they're primarily passed down as these 2 different schools, the Great Exposition and the Sutra schools. And these views spread. What is the primary view of, so what is the primary period of the teachings that they come out of? These come out of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the teachings on the 4 Noble Truths. And so when teaching this, well, what is actually the main practice that these schools do? Well, the main practice they do is to practice the 4 Noble Truths. Now, when we talk about practice, of course, we have different things we can talk about. We can talk about view, meditation, and conduct, of course, but primarily when we talk about this in terms of the view, they talk about the view of the lack of an individual self, the selflessness of the individual. And so this is a method to subdue or to tame the afflictions or the kleshas that we have. So we have the afflictions of the of greed, aversion, and delusion. And so generally, when we talk about things, when we talk about the different types of obscurations that we have, in general we talk about 2 different types of obscurations. There are the afflictive obscurations and there are the cognitive obscurations. So we have the afflictive and the cognitive obscurations. And of these 2, these schools primarily work with the afflictive obscurations. They primarily do the practices of that deal with the afflictive obscurations. So these are the practices of the Great Exposition exposition and the sutra schools. And in their view, as it says here, the great exposition and the sutra schools are the foundation vehicle. Each has 7 particular propositions. So as it says here, they each have their own particular views and their own particular things. But in general, they share share certain propositions. They share the idea that whether we think about long periods of time or whether we think about coarse physical objects, that they're all made up of indivisible units. So in terms of long periods of time, like years or months or so forth, or in terms of coarse phenomena like big things, mountains or whatever sort of commons, all of these are just relative terms. These are all relative, they are sort of fictitious, they are not true, they are confusion. But what is the root that they're made out of? Well, they're made out of atoms that have no part in them. They're so partless atoms and instances that don't have any part. So like when you have particles, you can take something and you can divide it up into particles. You divide it and you keep going further and further down, dividing it into a smaller and smaller particle, until finally you come to a partless atom that you can't divide into any direction. You can't say that there's an east side or a south or a west or a north side. There's no way to distinguish any part. And so that is the partless atom, or the smallest possible particle. And then when you think about time, we have periods of time, like we have a year, months, days, yesterday, tomorrow, whatever. But all of these units of time, they can all be divided up into smaller and smaller units of time until you come to an instant of time that is so short that you can't say that it has any beginning or any end. There's no way that it relates to any past or any future. There's no past or future in it at all. And so that is the smallest indivisible instant of time. So all of our experience, all of the coarse phenomena, all of the periods of time are made up of these indivisible instants or indivisible atoms, and they are not true in any way. So generally when we think about the phenomena that we have, there are the external phenomena that we perceive, and there also is the internal perceiving mind. And of these two, what are the external phenomena that we perceive made up of? They're primarily made up of these partless atoms. So all of the external phenomena are made up of indivisible atoms. And then there our internal mind. If we look at our mind, actually, our mind comes in moments. And so the smallest possible unit of our mind is this indivisible instant of time. So in this way, our mind, we can see that everything comes together by all of these things put together. There's nothing true about them in any way. With our mind, there's nothing true about the longer periods of time. We think of there being years and yesterday and tomorrow and so forth, but actually they're just these indivisible instants of time that are all that we all put together and say are a year or time. And so when we meditate upon this, we can come to understand the lack of an individual self. And then through doing that, then we'll stop our fixation on ourself. And the reason that this works is that normally when we think of ourselves as being like there's a single me. I'm permanent. There's me. I'm lasting. There's some sort of enduring sort of me. I was here yesterday. I'm going to be here tomorrow. And we think that like there was this me that was a child. There's a me that's an adult. There's a me that's going to become an old person. And it's all the same me, this sort of lasting, permanent sense of a me. But actually, when we look at that me, it's just a whole bunch of indivisible instants that go through time. It's all these particles that are put together. So we realize that actually it's just all these particles and that are assembled, that it's all of these indivisible instants of time. And if we realize that, then we'll naturally come to know that there is no self of an individual. And so that is the reason why the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School primarily have this same view of meditating upon the lack of an individual self.
Dine ta tela ta chitang gongso ge dome pa topa ta ti gomni topa te kar chimpo la 대점 대용마지 당가란소 공사 그다음에 리피 줍니 고아지와 돼요. 배 펜토 첨부 요아래 다 될라 공사 그다음에 받대는 파브카슬라 되네 조아 둘트인 참이 생긴데 히바케지 참이 니디 되네 인지 민지 매발 두고가 요 말에 되네 준생 가리레세나 대야 매바세나 되네 가야 매바 개와시나요 팽매바 디바시나요 니미 매바제 웅그레 sombe게 농동년바제 샤나요 히게 말해라 대답으더니 단다 드니 게미 디미게 따완다고지 정나 드니 디게 랑로발란도게 와래라 드니 디 양다바제 문로웨체도 데라 문로웨체도 드니 참이니 좀 덴바르트바 케랑 드니 공사가 더 매바 또발라 데니 녜몽바데 녜몽바드바데 빵토바 드니 데라 데니 람티 데나 파바임 베처나 드니 다티 치단 예퍼나와임 베처나 데나 데니 히탈라 세다티 데나 데니 제두 세라다 나와도 도데바니라 치단 예퍼 켈랭게 요아레 디 덴바르트바 켈랭게 요아레 네 세다 튼타 나와 니 종아레라 다티 테나 데니게 옌틴다보 카리요아레세나 테니 코로안디게 짜와데 공사가 당진레 데 다미 또 비히랍티 람니 텐도 점베 테니 타르바토게 요아레 소 타르바토게 요아 요바데 테니 코로발레 타르네 니아모 바탕지 빵 니아모 바탕지 bom발라 테니 코로와동 년송근네스 제마 그바제 용게 요바데 베 다 펜토 첨보래라 펜토 첨보레데 예나야 다감들서는 왼쪽 주제 다음에 마토베 드로완 타르투반네 메베철 렌친팅와도 제도도 전주 헤랄레우가스 제바르드바 따로 숨드텔라 다 추탄지 돈이도 때나 파요아르베스나 파요 말에 좀한도 트린참이 템버트바레 히바케지 참이 템버트바레 something 좀바요아르라 다 텔라티니 짱 가리 용게 요아르세나 나란솔라 찌타 넘버 산지베게 드레블 넘버 2 요아르 타르바 생긴제도 탐진 쳔바 생긴제게 드레브 2 요아르라 타르바시도 가리세그레세나 녜몽바빵 코르왈라 제마구바 되는 인투 다점바시 코르왈라 제마구바 점제 둥할레 돌와제 용게야바텔라 타르바세요 탐진 쳔바 세두 상제 세두 다 녜몽바타 드바탐지 빵네 되니 히자 탐지 제네루 제다와yen도 또바다 쳔베게 이히디 제네 쳔세 쳔바타 세와타 누바테 넘바 som동 템베 산지지 공pon토바텔라 탐지 쳔바세게 요아렐라 되니 티처나 공사가 더 메바 짱바 감 닌투세라다 나와돈 도데바타르도 냠슬랑나 타르바토게 요아레 탐지 쳔바 손지지 공pon테 토토게 요마레 손네 되니 다테 우멘텐 주텐 주게나도 데 성요아레 손네 다테 파 샬폼바렐라 대띠게 탐진 쳔비 공포 모두 자와데 칸데레세나 추 탐지 더 메바 또바 추 다미데 또요 말해라 드니 디처나 산지지 공포 은이데 토토요 말해
So realizing the selflessness of the individual is really important. Meditating upon the selflessness of the individual is very important. But not only that, it is also really helpful and beneficial to establish it through logic and reasoning, to understand it. It's very helpful to do this. So as we meditate upon the selflessness of the individual, we can see that when we meditate upon this, do we say that the atoms, the indivisible atoms in the indivisible instance of time are not established at their emptiness? We don't say that. We do not prove that. And the reason for doing that is that if you say there's nothing at all, then there's this danger that you might say, oh, then I don't have to do virtuous things. I don't have to give up doing bad things. There's no problem that comes out of misdeeds and wrongdoing. And so you might have this sort of wrong understanding, this misconception. And so if you have that, then you'll think that there's no virtue and there are no misdeeds, and then you will go down the wrong path. And so that you go down the right path, then it's taught that actually there are these partless particles, and that there are these indivisible entities, that they do truly exist. And so then we can, through meditating upon this, we can come to understand that there is the selflessness of the individual. When we realize the selflessness of the individual, then we are able to give up the afflictive obscurations. And through doing that, then we progress down the path and we come down to the result. Now, generally, when we talk about the and so here, for this reason, these schools teach that there are the external particles, that they do truly exist. And this is why, as it says here, they assert the existence of external phenomena, and thus are known as the two externalist schools. They're called externalist schools because they say that there are the indivisible atoms that actually exist, that are outside. So they're called the externalist schools. And so they. So now, what is the? And so these are the two schools: the Sutra school and the Great Exposition school, that say that that are the externalist schools. Now, what is the quality? What are the good things about this? The good thing about this is that the root of wandering in samsara is the afflictions of greed, delusion, and greed, aversion, and delusion. And so when we realize that there's no self, then we can destroy these afflictions entirely and forever. And so when we do that, then we attain liberation. And by attaining liberation, then we no longer will need to be reborn in samsara, will no longer need to be reborn in the lower realms. And so that is really good. That is really wonderful. That is actually amazing that it can happen. But as it says here, these schools do not realize the lack of existence of phenomena, and thus do not achieve complete liberation. This is described in detail in the Ratnavali, refuting disputes in the wisdom chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattvas. So do these schools realize the emptiness of all phenomena? Well, okay, they don't realize the emptiness of all phenomena. They say that there are these partless particles, that there are atoms, that they say that there are these partless, indivisible instants that are truly exist. They have some fixation on that, and because of that, what is it that they can attain? Well, generally, in the Buddhist view, we say that there are two different types of result that we can attain. We can attain liberation, and we can attain omniscience. And so, if we just get rid of the afflictive obscurations, then we can come to the result of the arhat, of the listener or the Shravaka schools. And this is just merely freeing ourselves from all, merely freeing ourselves from all of the suffering of samsara. But it's not the same as the state of Buddhahood. Buddhahood is when we free ourselves of all of the afflictive obscurations and also of all of the cognitive obscurations. We've freed ourselves of all obscurations entirely, and so we've awakened ourselves to the true nature of everything that can be known. We've realized that. And because we've realized that, we develop the qualities of love, of wisdom, love, and power. We awaken to the state of Buddhahood, and that is what we call omniscience. And so when you just realize only the selflessness of the individual, then you can achieve the liberation of the listener schools, of the Great Exposition and the Sutra schools, but you are not really able to come to the actual omniscience of the state of Buddhahood. And so this is, as explained in detail in the Madhyamaka, which we will come to tomorrow, later on in the text. So why is it that they have not realized that they aren't able to realize the omniscience? It's because they have not been able to realize the selflessness of phenomena, and because they have not realized the selflessness of phenomena, they are not able to awaken to the state of Buddhahood.
Tini dogung te tsam shuna into sera nawa ton to de betunda de tuparela. Tini sani sensam petawa de la tini moa ta melam che.
And so that is enough for this afternoon. We have talked about the two schools, the listener schools of the Great Exposition and the Sutra school. Tomorrow we'll talk about the mind-only school, and we'll now have the dedication and aspiration prayers.
So